I guess what brought me to the work I do would go way back to my formative years as an undergrad. I remember taking a modern English course in which we were reading Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and my professor gave a reading of Lucky's speech. There's a speech in the play in which a character, Lucky, spouts out gibberish for 4 pages. It's hysterically funny, but seems more or less meaningless. And my professor came out with this reading saying that if you select a certain number of words in a certain order, following the sort of cryptographic way of reading the text, you get a certain reading of the text. I remember raising my hand and saying, you could choose other words according to other keys and come up with a different reading. And he looked at me and said, "You are an accomplice of Stanley Fish." I didn't much take to Stanley Fish's theory, but it then prompted me to read a whole bunch of other literary theory, including Jacques Derrida, Luce Irigaray, Hélène Cixous, and then a bunch of other French theorists in general, and got hooked on French theory. And then discovered that a bunch of these French theorists I was reading were alive and teaching in Paris. So I went to Paris and studied with them and ended up taking courses with Jacques Derrida and Alain Badiou, and started to write a dissertation with Hélène Cixous. And then ended up coming back to the States and working on my dissertation in the States. But what I got from these French theorists was ways to think about one's relationship to the world, ways to question the parameters of what seemed to be given ways of acting according to certain sets of rules, as opposed to working within the rules. What these theorists help me think through is ways to question those rules. One of the things that was formative of my interests goes way back to my formative years as a budding punk in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Kind of a spirit of contestation, idea that the world should be critiqued and that there's some form of expression, which for me was the punk movement, that lends itself to a critique of the world the way it was. Now, the punk movement kind of goes in several different directions. There's a kind of scary, to me, hardcore, straight edge, kind of right-wing fascist tendency, which I find pretty horrifying. And then kind of the underside of that, sometimes impossible or difficult to differentiate from that, is a much more critical attitude towards the society in general, which would be in which one couldn't simply replace it with another ideology. I'm looking at the work of a bunch of French theorists who think of revolution as an end in itself. The sort of perpetual critique of the world, as opposed to simply trying to substitute another, trying to plug in an end, working towards a preconceived end. This notion of endless revolutions can be, on the one hand, liberating. On the other hand, it can be a little scary. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the explosive energy of a revolution that would be liberating and its darker underside, which can lead to all sorts of racist and sexist violence. So this book project is trying to think through this idea of endless revolutions without shying away from the scary aspects of it either. What drew me to CAST is its interdisciplinary nature. I'm an interdisciplinary guy. Unlike some of my colleagues who think that, philosophers should study philosophers, sociologists should study sociology, basically the idea that good fences make good neighbors, I think that using these various ways of thinking about things in conjunction with each other and combining them is a way to get a much richer understanding of the world we live in, who we are, and the world in which we live. One of the challenges I've faced in my research, and that I still face, is thinking about the idea of identity. We all have a sense of identity. There is something that defines us in some way. We all have a sort of inner core of being, even though it's changing all the time. But what makes me uncomfortable is the sort of labeling of people according to a bunch of sociological categories, demographic categories, really, according to one's sex, one's gender, one's age, one's nationality, one's ethnicity, as though people were somehow irreducible to this series of attributes. One of the things that I'm interested in is making a relationship between what happens inside the classroom and what's going on outside the classroom. So this is both the sort of thinking about the external world and literally going out of the classroom, using going to films, going to see plays, going to museums together to expand the boundaries of the classroom, and also as a way to engage in dialogue and debate in a setting outside of the classroom. What inspires me as a teacher is the classroom dynamic. The buzz of us all working through something together as a sort of group think tank, getting a problem and chewing on it together, looking at an image and working through it, analyzing it, thinking about it from a bunch of different angles, trying to get people to explore new ways of thinking. I'm a collaborative person. I like working with others. So one of the things that inspires me is my students, my colleagues, my friends. Often little dialogue, little debate with my friends and colleagues and students lead to larger projects down the road.